All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Massive Breakdown Podcast. This is episode 40. We're celebrating 10 months, our 10-month anniversary of doing podcast. It is amazing that we have made this journey together with you guys, the listeners. So happy to have you with us today. It's just Kutch and I. We're going to be talking about something that has been very, very requested. A lot of people have asked us a lot of questions about a bunch of different stats, the stats we talk about. We're always talking about stability, accuracy, range, recoil direction, inventory, all this stuff. And it occurred to us that we have not in a very, very long time actually talked about what all of the stats themselves mean. Things like optimal time to kill, body shot time to kill, equip speed, all these things. We're going to talk about them all today. We're going to give you guys an overview. So if you're just coming into Destiny, just finding the podcast, and you're wondering what the hell do all these stats mean when you're looking at them in game, we're going to tell you. If you've been around for a while and you've heard us talk about stuff, but maybe you just want a refresher, you want the exact definitions, we're here to help you out with that too. But first, let's get the introductions out of the way. My name, as always, is Mercules. Joined tonight by Kit Kutcha. How are you doing, Kit?
Merc, man, I'm doing fantastic. This is where my real English nerd comes out. I am super excited for a vocabulary lesson tonight. I can't wait to dig into it. There are just so many terms. There's so much jargon in Destiny. It was so opaque when I started, and I feel like, we've come such a long way just through spending way too much time reading and testing and playing around with these things. So I can't wait to actually talk about, what does it all mean? So I'm very happy to be doing that tonight. How about you, man? How are you doing?
I'm excellent. This is what got me into the Destiny community in terms of contributing, is the stats. Figuring out time to kill was a mission I made for myself more than a year ago, probably a year and a half ago. I made it my mission to figure out time to kill, and it blossomed into something so much bigger than that. And I just kept having questions. What does accuracy mean? What does range mean? What does range do? What does aim assist do? Because there were a lot of people who were saying, oh, I think it does this, or oh, I think it does this. But at that point in time, not very many people had devoted the effort into actually figuring it out. And I saw that there was, space for someone who would do that. So I started devoting myself to what we now know as the massive breakdowns. And a lot of them were about recoil direction. What does recoil direction do? What does counterbalance do? What does range do? How does aim assist work? So those things I'm stoked to be here talking about, because I've never actually done all of them in one place. I've done some of them here, some of them there, thrown a few of them together. But this is going to be hopefully like the definitive guide to all of these stats. And if you don't have anything else to add in the very beginning, Kid, I think we can just jump right in.
No, I know you are super excited to talk about the stats that really, I think a lot of people probably know you for figuring out and explaining in a clear and concise way in the first place. So I'm just going to, go hands-free here and just let you take the wheel.
All right then. So the first thing we're going to talk about is probably what a lot of people consider like the golden stat, the most important stat, at least for PvP. PvE, it doesn't matter as much. PvE is DPS, which is damage per second. That's something that's more along the lines of what Datto does. Datto is really, really big in the community in terms of doing damage per second. And we're not going to be going over that because honestly, that's not my forte. I like the PvP equivalent of it, which is time to kill. It's basically how long it takes for a weapon in an optimal situation to kill a target. Now, obviously, because Destiny has different armor values for Guardians, Guardian health can be different. I think the very, very bottom health value is like 183 at 1, somewhere around there. And then the very top one is like, now it's like 214 or something like that, I believe is what it is. Maximum, which is like 13 armor, is like 214. I'm not exactly sure what the values are since the last patch changed the way they worked. But it's somewhere around there. It's 210 plus. And so time to kill, what I use for my spreadsheet is just an average. It's 9 to 10 armor. It's about 200 HP. And so what I do is I take how much damage the weapon does, and I figure out how many shots it takes to kill a target that's at 200 HP. And I don't always just do critical hits. Sometimes I see, what's the easiest combination to hit in the fastest possible time? So if it takes 3 critical hits for a hand cannon to kill someone, I then see, well, can you kill them with 2 critical hits and a body shot? You can. Can you kill them with 1 critical hit and 2 body shots? Oh, you can. So that becomes the optimal time to kill. Now, if I was able to kill them in 2 critical hits, then 2 critical hits would be the optimal time to kill. You see how it goes? So every time we try to get the easiest, meaning the smallest percentage of critical hits, but time comes first. It has to be the fastest possible time. Because if you can kill someone in all body shots, but it takes 4 hits instead of 3, that's no longer optimal. And that brings us to the second part of time to kill, which is the body shot time to kill. And the body shot time to kill is if you hit no headshots, all you hit are body shots, but you don't miss, how long will it take you to kill a target? And the reason why I have both of these is because realistically, for the majority of players, the time it takes for that weapon to kill is somewhere in between those 2 values. The optimal time to kill is the perfect situation. It is the best possible outcome. You're hitting the right combination of shots, and you're maintaining maximum rate of fire for that weapon. Some guns are easier than others to get that. Mid-impact hand cannons, quite easy to get it. 1 critical hit, 2 body shots, that's not bad at all. Now let's talk about low-impact auto rifles. To get .87, you have to hit 13 critical hits in 1 body. With a low-impact auto rifle, a bullet hose, that's almost impossible. So that's why I include the body shot time to kill. So you know that realistically, it's probably going to be somewhere in between there. We know we're not going to hit only body shots most of the time. We know we're not going to hit only critical shots. We're going to hit some combination of the 2. So that's time to kill, long story short.
And I think that's one of those things that on a certain implicit level everybody kind of understands, but it's not something that really gets spelled out very often. So I'm glad that we are kind of taking the time to really spell that out because, you know, I occasionally do get somebody who's a little confused by that term. You know, what is time to kill? What is optimal time to kill? You know, why does the body time to kill have all bodies, but the optimal time to kill isn't all crits? And so there are some nuances there. A couple of things that I wanted to just raise from the things you talked about, Merc. I know that you have been dedicating some time in private matches to figuring out for any given armor value what can kill somebody, and I don't know that you are quite finished with that. I know that's just an amazing amount of work that goes into figuring that out because obviously there are 13 armor levels, so many different guns to test. So just kind of throwing that out there as something that's in the pipeline for people to look forward to in the future. Really having a good grasp on what will kill you at every armor level. But the other thing that I wanted to kind of just put in there as another nuance in the whole time to kill discussion is that, you know, you talked about how your average time to kill or your typical time to kill often falls between the optimal time to kill and the body shot time to kill, right? The max if you land all your shots, but they aren't crits. And so one of the things that makes that kind of interesting is that certain guns will lend themselves more to getting one of those kind of average time to kills, whereas other guns are basically, they're a little more punishing if you don't get the optimal time to kill. So mid-impact hand cannons are a great example for what I'm trying to communicate very badly right now. So mid-impact hand cannons, the optimal time to kill is relatively easy to hit, right? 1 crit, 2 bodies. With some practice, it's not too hard to land those 3 shots. Landing them at the max rate of fire, under pressure, that takes a little more time, but it is something you can learn to do. However, because those shots are spaced out more, and because each 1 bullet does a lot of damage, unless it misses, right? Those misses really punish you. So your time to kill is basically going to go up high with every miss. Auto rifles are very much the opposite end of that spectrum. Every bullet does just a small amount of damage. So if you miss a shot, or if your shots are suboptimal, you're much more likely to still land in that space in between the fastest time to kill and the slowest, which makes those weapons much more forgiving. And that, I think, is why you see a lot of newer players tending toward auto rifles and a lot of very experienced players tending toward hand cannons or scout rifles that are less forgiving, or even pulse rifles kind of fall into a sort of a middle of the road area there, where they combine some of the high reward aspects of hand cannons with some of the more forgiving aspects of auto rifles. So there's a lot of nuance there and a lot of variety in in your time to kill and in how forgiving it is to achieve that optimal time to kill.
Yeah, and a perfect example of that was the high impact scouts. The high impact scouts, if you hit 3 headshots, we're not talking about Chaos Dogma here for once, even though I love that gun. Let's talk about, Cositus.
But we are talking about it now.
Well, I'm gonna stay off the subject, or else I'm gonna start rambling. Cositus, if you hit 3 headshots, you get a 0.8 second time to kill. That's 0.8 seconds basically anywhere on the map. That's fantastic. 0.8 seconds at this stage in the game is very, very good for a primary weapon. However, if you miss your headshots and you rely on body shots, it's 1.6 seconds, which is horrendously slow, among the slowest in the game. Actually, it might be the slowest in the game for a body shot time to kill. It's high risk, high reward. Doctrine of Passing is the opposite of that. If you hit all of your critical hits, it's 0.87. That's not quite as fast. But even if you only hit body shots, it's 1.07, which is very, very fast. The fastest body shot time to kill in the game for a primary weapon. So those are the variances. Right now, in the state of the Crucible, 0.8 seconds is a good time to kill. 0.87 seconds is a good time to kill. 0.9 seconds, 0.93 seconds, we're starting to get out of competitive range. It depends on the gun. Scout rifles that kill in 0.9, 0.93 are still okay because they have greater reach. You can kill from middling distances at that time. But something like a high impact auto that kills in 0.93 just isn't that useful because up close it's not even killing that fast, and then you have no value out at long distance. So right now you're looking for something in the 0.8, 0.87 range. For body shots, 1.2 is what we look at in terms of being really good, like top of the line for most guns, not for low impact ARs. 1.5 is where we start getting like that's bad. 1.5 is slow. 1.6 is terrible. It used to be different than this. In year one, we were looking at 0.5, 0.6, 0.7. Usually 0.5 were guns like The Last Word with some of its weird... The Last Word still has the ability to kill in 0.5. It's like 0.53 or something like that. But it's been hit so many times with the Nerf hammer that it's not quite as good as it used to be. Used to be able to kill with Thorn in like 0.6.
I was going to say there was a point where The Last Word's optimal time to kill was 0.25 seconds because it was 2 headshots dealing 110 damage each. Obviously, that probably needed to be changed, which is why it was.
It did. It very badly needed to be changed because it was brutal, and people were like, "Oh, it's not that easy to do." It was relatively easy as far as it went. Like it happened a decent.
It was a lot easier than it is now.
Yeah, The Last Word and Thorn, there was a period of time where they were broken. But at the same point, we had Red Death killing in 0.67. Yep. We had Suros back in year one when it was really, really broken, doing crazy amounts of damage to the head that was killing in times like that. There was a period of time where 0.6 was, that was what it took to be competitive, basically. 0.7, you were starting to fade out a little bit. And 0.8 was like, okay, maybe. And then anything after that, there's a reason Mida wasn't popular until everything else got nerfed. Mida was the same gun it's basically always been. Yeah. In fact, it was more powerful than it is now, but it wasn't popular. Pulse rifles, with the exception of the high impact ones, which could kill in 2 bursts, were not popular because they were killing in about the times they're killing at right now. 0.87 wasn't fast enough, didn't cut it, wasn't even close. So, I mean, that shows you how much the game has slowed down. We've lost almost a fifth of a second in terms of the overall time to kill for primaries for what's considered competitive. And that's a discussion for another day. We've talked about it a lot. We've really, really discussed how we feel about where the game was going. But I think at this point in time, Bungie's decided they want a slower game. It's unfortunate that they gave us a faster game first, and then they kind of weaned it back. But I think they've decided they want a slower game, and that's why we're seeing the Crucible move in the direction it is.
Yeah, and it's it's one of those things at this point where I like to stay away from value judgments in terms of saying, oh, it's good, it's bad, I hate it, I love it, because that's not productive anymore, right? Those discussions have been had, we've moved on. At this point, we're just talking the raw numbers, just the facts, and it is what it is, and now we're at where we are. So, but that is how time to kill works, and how you get there, and how you get to points in between.
Yep. And then so the next couple of stats, they both have very much to do with times to kill, but it's rate of fire and impact. And rate of fire is exactly what it sounds like it is. Now, it's on a scale from 1 to 100, so the number you see is not It doesn't actually correspond to like a rounds per minute type number. It's just on a scale of 1 to 100. I can tell you right now, a 100 rate of fire weapon fires a shot every other frame. So it's bullet fired, blank frame, bullet fired. And the only guns that hit that rate of fire are pulse rifles within a burst. So pulse rifles within a burst, meaning when you pull the trigger and it fires shot, frame, shot, frame, shot. Or in Ludmala's, thing, or the hockey pulse rifles have a fourth. And then the lowest impact auto rifles and the lowest impact machine guns are around that area. And then it goes down from there. I think some of the slowest rate of fire guns in the game would be like the Suros regime with focus fire has 6 frames in between each bullet. There's some weapons like the Ludmila has like 9 frames in between bursts or something like that. I'm not sure of the exact numbers off the top of my head. I have to do the math, but there's a decent amount of frames in between it. I think the Parthian shot might have.
I think it's
even more than that,
10.
10 or 11.
I believe it's.
Is it? Yeah.
I believe it's 10.
So, I mean, those are the slower rate of fire guns, but it's pretty much self-explanatory. It's how fast the gun shoots. Then there's impact. Impact is tied into the amount of damage a weapon does, and it was also supposed to be tied into flinch, but they didn't do it very well. The problem they had is that basically, I'm trying to think how to explain this. You had a maximum level of flinch that could be impacted upon you, and it was determined by the impact stat of the gun that was hitting you. So supposedly, a higher impact gun would be able to make you flinch to a higher maximum level. The problem is lower impact guns, even though their maximum flinch was less, got you there faster because the number of bullets hitting you brought you to maximum flinch much more quickly. So even though hypothetically you would have been flinching less if you were getting shot by a Clever Dragon and you were getting shot by a Cocytus, the Cocytus, when you were flinching at its maximum amount, should have been a whole lot more. The problem is that the Clever Dragon was hitting its maximum flinch in a burst or two, like that. Half a second and you're at maximum flinch. Whereas the Cocytus, it takes 0.8 seconds, 1.2 seconds to get maximum flinch, which is too long by that point in time. So that wasn't a very well implemented thing in the game, in my opinion. I've always been of the opinion that high impact means it should flinch you more. And for the longest time, you heard me preaching that we need high impact weapons to deal more flinch, high impact weapons to deal more flinch, high impact weapons to deal more flinch. Well, they went the other way and they just nerfed the shit out of Clever Dragon, Grasp of Malak, and all pulse rifles and how much flinch they do. So it kind of solved that problem, but it was, instead of raising something up, they brought something else down, which, whatever, it worked, it did it. It got rid of the flinch problem with Clever Dragon, but it was a sign to me, it was symptomatic of a mechanic that wasn't functioning the way that I believe it should have.
Yeah, flinch is another one of those mechanics, I think, that induces salt in a lot of people on any side of the argument. I think there are a lot of different sides as far as where that should have gone, how flinch should work. I'm with you on this one, that we've talked about this ad nauseum, I think. So I'm not going to reiterate what you just said, but essentially, the way flinch works, of course, is that you get hit by a bullet and your reticle deflects in a presumably random direction if the flinch is working correctly, which occasionally it's not, but most of those bugs have been ironed out at this point by a certain amount. Right, and so that happens for each bullet that hits you. So for a high rate of fire weapon, if you get hit by 3 bullets within 5 frames, that adds up, right? Each of those bullets deflects you in a random direction, so it can send your reticle all over the place. Whereas if you've got something like, say, a hand cannon, has a lot of impact, it actually does do a ton of flinch. Hand cannons cause a pretty fair amount of flinch. They can make it very hard to fire back immediately after that shot, because they deflect you by a considerable amount. But because hand cannon users are pacing their shots in many cases, or they simply have to wait before they can pull the trigger, right? They can't just, it's not a sidearm. There's a little bit of time, and so you start to recover before that next shot hits, and you have a chance to fire back. So that's the flinch mechanic. That's why oftentimes high impact weapons, even if they do a lot of flinch, don't really feel like they're flinching. the opponent that much, and why low impact weapons, even if they don't do a ton of flinch, often feel like they do. Basically, it's just math over time. It's one of those things we probably could have been figured out sooner by somebody who had access to those numbers over at Bungie, but maybe they did and they didn't think it was a problem, and eventually we all got salty and they changed it. So
yeah, exactly correct. I mean, even before we had the Clever Dragon epidemic, the Doctrine of Passing was a flinch monster when that gun first came out. So impact also has a secondary effect. It's critical damage and body shot damage. Now the way it works is there's a base damage the gun does, which is the body shot damage, and then you get a multiplier when you hit a critical spot on a target. This is why you see the yellow numbers pop up. Now you'll also notice that if someone is hit by a firebolt grenade, or if someone is tethered, you will also see a yellow number pop up. That is a multiplier. It's showing you a multiplier is being added to it. So what happens is most guns in the game have a 1.5 times critical hit multiplier. That means they do 1.5 times the body shot damage for critical hits. Some weapons do not. Auto rifles, I believe, have 1.3 times or something like that?
At this point, yeah, I think that's right.
It's 1.3. Sidearms are 1.2. I think snipers are 2.5 or something like that. Snipers have a much larger one than the rest of them.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And I could obviously do the math here if I wasn't terrible at math, and I didn't need a calculator to do even the most basic of arithmetic. But basically, there's a headshot multiplier, critical spot multiplier. So that's what's happening when you're seeing a yellow number pop up. Firebolt grenades also apply a multiplier. Tethers also apply a multiplier, stuff like that. So that's what the damage comes from, and impact is the stat that determines how much damage they do. So that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think we need to talk too much more at length about either rate of fire, impact, time to kill. I think we've covered it. Do you agree on that, Kutch?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty straightforward stuff. I think we've definitely kicked that dead horse.
Yeah. So what we're going to move on to are the stats that are a little bit more, I want to call them opaque. They're not as well explained in-game what they actually do. These shots are range, stability, aim assist, and accuracy. Accuracy is a stat that for a long time caused a lot of issues with people not really knowing what accuracy was. It really actually took a Crucible Radio episode where they interviewed some of the Crucible designers to figure out what accuracy actually meant. And it turns out that 3 out of those 4 stats actually have multiple stats within them that are hidden, that are affected. So we'll start with range first, and then we'll move on to accuracy, because those two are very much linked. And somewhat surprisingly, aim assist is linked to them too. So what range does, range is a stat. It's supposed to show you how effective your gun will be at longer distances. And range has 3 intrinsic things inside of it that are made up for it. It's damage fall off, meaning how quickly your bullet starts to lose, at what point your bullet starts to lose damage. It does less damage than it would optimally. And then how quickly after that it loses damage. Then the next thing is aim assist fall off. Your aim assist is at its maximum effectiveness up close, meaning how sticky your reticle is, and some other things we'll talk about with aim assist. But as you get farther and farther away from the target, you may notice that your gun doesn't seem to want to stick to that target. That's Bungie's way of telling you that you're outside of the effective range for their weapon. Those of you who played Halo Reach knew this because the DMR. In Halo Reach, the DMR's reticle would turn red when you were within the effective range of the weapon. When you were outside the effective range of the weapon, it would not turn red. The reticle would stay blue, and there would be no stickiness. It was like trying to aim at a teammate. So it was an on-off type thing. When you hit a certain range, you were outside of the DMR's effective distance, it no longer helped you out. It's similar to that in Destiny. It doesn't quite just turn off, though. It just drops off very, very fast. So you'll hit a point, and your maximum aim assist, your gun will start to lose stickiness, and then it will basically be not sticky at all over, some other distance. And that is also affected by range. There's a period of time where they were linked, one and the same. They basically happen at the same distance, but Bungie actually made it to where they could change them independently. And that's when we started getting some really weird range effects going on when they were nerfing things.
And just one thing I want to throw in there, if you want to know what it feels like to shoot your gun without help from aim assist, go to the plague lands and find those shanks that are flying around like randomly welding things. Try to shoot one of those. Try this especially with a hand cannon. Good luck.
Yeah, it's difficult. Same thing, you can try to shoot a teammate. Like, try actually tracking a teammate and shooting a teammate in the Crucible, and it's hard. Without aim assist, console shooters would be nearly impossible to play. And that's why Halo, going off on a tangent, but that's why Halo was so successful. It was one of the first console shooters to really nail down that aim assist formula. Before that, we had things like GoldenEye, which kind of played fast and loose with what an FPS actually is in terms of how much it helped you. And then we had Halo, which actually gave you freedom of movement, but the reason it worked is because your thumbs aren't nearly as accurate as a mouse would be, so they gave you a lot of aim assist. It sticks you to a target and things like that. But we'll talk about aim assist more in a minute. The third thing that range does is actually affects what's called the accuracy cone. And the accuracy cone is, imagine a cone that comes out from the end of the barrel. The point is stuck in the end of the barrel, and the wide end of the cone is branching out. And whenever you're aiming at a target, the cone paints across the target, right? And that cone displays how far off from center the bullet can possibly deflect. So a low accuracy weapon, and this is where we're going to start to get into accuracy. A low accuracy weapon has a very, very wide cone. Think a shotgun. A high accuracy weapon has a very, very narrow cone. Think a sniper rifle or a scout rifle. So with low accuracy, it means that the bullet can deflect very, very far away from center. It means these guns are most welcome at close range. High accuracy means the gun cannot deflect very, very far from center. It means that it goes basically in a straight line out the end of the barrel. And that's what's called error angle. All right, so we just talked about range. Range affects damage fall off, aim assist fall off, and the error angle, or the size of the accuracy cone. But error angle is not the only part of accuracy. There's also what's called projectile accuracy. And that is the percentage chance that your bullet will go dead center. The higher that percentage, the more likely your bullet is going to go exactly where you're aiming it. The lower that percentage, and that percentage lowers as you continue to fire, basically. That's what's called initial accuracy versus final accuracy. Initial accuracy, your bullet is very, very likely to go dead center, exactly where you're aiming it. As you continue to fire, the chance of it going dead center decreases, and the chance of it deflecting increases. And when you're at your lowest possible accuracy, it's when your accuracy cone is wide, and that's referred to as bloom. When the accuracy cone gets bigger, that's referred to as bloom. So that's what people complained about with hand cannons for a long time. The problem was hand cannons had really bad bloom, so they had bad error angle, and they had low projectile accuracy. So not only could the bullet deflect very far off center, but it also was very likely to deflect very far off center. And now it's uncertain how this plays directly into aim assist, but my idea, my hypothesis that I have is that your projectile accuracy is how likely the bullet is to go dead center or get the maximum possible assistance from the aim assist. So we know that bullets can deflect left and right depending on where your target is. If you've ever watched guns that actually have trails on the bullets, like Thorn, Necrochasm, I'm trying to think what else, Touch of Malice, you can actually see the trail tilt itself a little bit as the bullet goes into the target. And you can know that it's not random because you can put your aimer right next to a target and fire, and you can see the bullet pull into the target. Vex Mythoclast is a great example of this with the Phalanx's shields. You'll notice that if you put your Vex Mythoclast reticle right over the hand, the bullet will actually pull in towards the head and it will hit the shield. And it's very infuriating. That's the aim assist helping you out there. Well, in that case, hurting you. It does the same thing against other Guardians. So my theory, my hypothesis is that your initial shot either goes dead center if you're outside the aim assist range, or it gets the maximum possible deflection from aim assist. All right, does that make sense so far? Am I explaining it as well as I can, Kutch? Are you feeling that I should go back over any of this, or am I like I'm not too in depth, am I? I think I'm doing an okay job.
I think you're doing okay. It's complicated stuff, right? So this may be a section that people need to listen through a couple of times to really get everything down, and it's probably going to be good that we're going to have to put some of this in writing for people in terms of what the terms mean, and how this all fits together, because it's a big puzzle. I mean, I know you already have some of it in writing, but we'll have to probably republish some of that again here. Give people some notes.
I'll do a too long didn't read type thing, like what each one does, and I'm going to go over it again once I've gone over aim assist.
Yeah,
I'm going to go back and put them all together, because it's kind of hard because all three of them are linked.
Right.
So it's kind of hard for me to explain one of them, then I have to explain the other, then I have to explain the other, then we can go back and summarize it,
Yeah.
as it were.
Yeah, there's so much going on. So, so if you're listening, like you're getting confused, there's a lot of terms. Don't feel like it's you. It's a complicated subject. It took, I know, Merc, I know you spent a ton of hours researching this. We kind of bounced some discussion back and forth, trying to get it straight in your head. And it's difficult. It's complicated. So don't feel bad if you're like, okay, I need to rewind because this lost me a little bit. That's okay. It's complicated for us too.
And we'll have a study guide out for you before we give the final exam. So
I feel like this is turning into Destiny massive homework.
Yeah. Well, it's their choice to listen.
Yeah.
They should be taking notes, though, realistically, because this stuff helps.
It does.
But if you're right, moving on to aim assist. So aim assist also has 3 parts, and there are 3 parts that are famous in Bungie games. It's kind of like their secret formula. It's like the KFC recipe that makes their games so crunchy and delicious. But there's 3 parts of what they refer to as aim assist. All right? There's reticle slowdown, which is how much your reticle starts to slow down when you start to sweep over a target. All right, so if there's a stationary target and you swing your reticle past it, it will slow down as it nears the target, and then it will slow down even more as it passes the target, and then it will gradually accelerate as you move away from the target again. All right, and that's something you can test yourself. Then there's reticle stickiness, which is how much if you're aimed at a target and that target moves, your reticle wants to follow it a little bit. All right, so that's reticle stickiness. And then the third one, and the one that was really, really controversial for a long time, is bullet magnetism. It's how much the bullet will actually alter its path out the end of the barrel to track towards a target. Now, that one for a long time was very, very controversial, like I said, because people thought that it was hitboxes that were changing in size. Well, realistically, they're 2 terms for the same thing. What it basically means, what both of them basically mean, is that you can be aiming off of a physical model of a target and still hit it. All right. The difference between hitboxes and bullet magnetism is that with a hitbox, the bullet travels directly in a straight line through that hitbox. So what it makes it look like is it makes it look like the bullet actually missed the target, but the target still takes damage from it. With bullet magnetism, the bullet actually changes its path to go pull towards the target. Right? So the bullet actually impacts the target, but it looks like it came out of the gun at a weird angle. That's why you impact those phalanx shields all the time. That's why sometimes your bullet will pull into cover when someone is moving behind cover in the crucible and you shoot and your bullet pulls a little bit and hits a wall.
And so I want to throw in just a third possible programming option that may be in practice in Destiny. It's hard to know, right? We don't have any confirmation on exactly what Destiny is doing with the code. Although what they're doing does look more like bullet magnetism than it does like what a traditional hitbox model would look like. But this is something that was kind of thrown at me as a possibility by a game developer that I met through the Shotgun Academy guys, and he suggested that what Bungie could be doing is kind of a hybrid where they're using hitboxes because hitboxes are easier. They're lighter on the code side than writing actual bullet magnetism is. And then if once a hit is determined, they're simply drawing the bullet trail toward the physical model. So it could also be that they could be using hitboxes and then lying to us visually. And I mean lying in the term of like deceiving us, not maliciously, but simply, for the purposes of increasing, making the game feel more realistic.
So you don't feel like a bullet whizzed past your head and then you died from it, basically.
Right, exactly. And it is possible in that model to account for the fact that the line that is drawn would impact a wall and therefore not do damage. Although it's also possible that it could result in some situations where a bullet being drawn in such a way might appear to go through a wall and still do damage, which could account for some reports of that happening, although lag can also account for that. And now we're getting way off topic. It's super complicated. I'm going to let you get back to the stats.
Yeah. Well, that was a big problem that people had with it. Is they were saying in the Crucible, I'm getting killed by a bullet that doesn't look like it hit me. Well, realistically, that can, for the most part, be attributed to latency.
Right.
Your game thinks you are somewhere else. For instance, it happens to me all the time because screw you, Comcast, your net sucks, basically. But it happens to me all the time where I will think I'm behind cover, but I'm not. And I'll die when I'm behind cover, but on the other person's screen who saw me, I was still, a half second away from getting to cover, which is very, very unfortunate. I actually have a clip of me aiming at a spot in a doorway. I'm hard scoped on a doorway, and I get hit from a bullet that appears to come through the wall. And I get hit, and I flinch, and then 3 or 4 frames later, the guy appears where I was aimed at. So on my screen, there was no one there. And on his screen, I was just standing there hard scoping, not reacting to him being there. That's the type of latency that comes into play in PvP, all right? But that's a totally separate thing. That has to deal with the netcode. That's not our problem. That's their thing, all right? What aim assist is, and the reason why I prefer the term bullet magnetism is because when you see hitboxes, liberal use of hitboxes, basically, you do come up with that issue of bullets whizzing past your head and you still dying from them, basically, which is very infuriating. It's the opposite of what people are calling hitbox porn on Reddit, basically. It's the opposite of it. It's really, really a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
So I prefer bullet magnetism, but like I said, when it really comes down to it, whatever way Bungie's doing it, it's really a term for the same thing. The physical appearance of it is just different.
Yeah.
But really what it is it's a forgiving area around the target where you can technically miss, but it still counts as a hit. All right, so that's the third part of aim assist. Now, aim assist itself has an actual stat, a numbered stat. The lower the number is, the lower your bullet will deflect from center to pull to that target, or the lower the possibility of, basically, if you want to call it hitboxes, the smaller the hitbox is. What really happens is that if you go into the Last Rites mission on the moon, you can see when you go ADS, there's a little circle around your crosshairs, all right? So the crosshairs themselves, that represents the accuracy cone. The circle around the crosshairs represents how far outside of the accuracy cone you can still hit a target. So if you place the side of that circle on a target and your crosshairs are not on the target at all and you pull the trigger, you will still hit that target. But what happens is as you sustain fire, the circle gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And when it gets too small, it actually disappears. It goes away. All right. So you actually lose aim assist power as you maintain fire. Now, like we said with range, you also lose aim assist as you get farther and farther away. So at a certain point, you no longer have any bullet pull. You may notice that with a scout rifle, if you're standing right next to a phalanx and you shoot his hand, the bullet will pull into the shield. If you back way, way, way far up and you shoot his hand, you will hit directly onto his hand. And it's because at a certain point, the ability for that bullet to deflect starts to get negated, and the bullet just goes somewhere within the accuracy cone. So that's why people want accuracy on hand cannons. The range at which hand cannons lose that ability to pull the bullet to the target or to be off the target and still count as a hit is actually relatively close. I don't know the exact numbers on it because I haven't done this testing myself, but from the testing I've seen on Crucible Playbook, it's actually relatively close. Back when accuracy was really, really bad, I think it was something like 20 meters that they lose that ability to reliably hit a target when they're aimed next to it. So what they wanted was a very, very tight accuracy cone. And the way you get that is by increasing range as much as you can. You increase range as much as you can, it shrinks down the accuracy cone. It means that when you lose the ability for aim assist to deflect your bullet for you, it now goes basically as straight as it can within that accuracy cone. And it makes the gun more accurate, if that makes sense.
I wish that you could all see the hand gestures that are involved in this explanation. They're super helpful. Especially poking the finger at me. That was a little suggestive, but I think you got the point across.
I'm trying to explain this, and I know you guys can't see the visuals that I'm doing, but the way I explain best is when I do the visuals for myself. Kutch is also entertained, I'm sure, but I do the visuals myself, and then it helps me to formulate the words that I need to use to explain this.
Oh, man.
But yes, so that's how those things all tie in together, right? So range, to summarize, has to deal with aim assist fall off, damage fall off. Damage fall off is the most predictable out of all those. Aim assist fall off, damage fall off, and accuracy cone. The higher your range, the more narrow your accuracy cone. All right? Accuracy, and the accuracy cone is the error angle. Accuracy has two things: error angle, how far the bullet can deflect, and projectile accuracy, how likely the bullet is to deflect. The higher, what I would call the higher the projectile accuracy, that means the less likely it is to deflect. The higher the projectile accuracy, the more likely it is to get the maximum effect of the aim assist. And then aim assist has reticle stickiness, which is how sticky your reticle is when the target is moving and you're already aimed at it, how much it wants to follow it. Reticle slowdown, which is how much your reticle slows down when you sweep past the target. And then bullet magnetism, whatever you want to call it, I'm using the term bullet magnetism, which is how far off the target you can be and still have it be registered as a hit when the bullet pulls towards the target. All right? So I hope that I covered those things, because those are like the most complicated stats, in my opinion, that exist in Destiny. But there they are.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think that you got, all joking aside, a good explanation there for people. Obviously, if you still have more questions, if you're listening to this right now, look for us on Twitter, at DestinyMVP, at Mercules904, at Kit_Kutcha, that's KYT_KUTCHA. I have to spell mine. Mercules is just Hercules with an M. There you go. So look us up and feel free to ask those questions anytime. We're constantly answering questions about stats, about roles on Twitter. Happy to do it. It's fun for us. It takes us out of the workday for a minute to do that stuff. So by all means, take advantage. But that said, I think you did a good job explaining that in as concise a manner as is possible, given the subject matter.
Yep. And then, so the next stat and the last one that I'm going to take the lead on is going to be stability. And stability, as much as it seems like it would be so simple, is so totally misunderstood. And somewhat surprisingly, stability actually affects aim assist as well, which was something that I did not know until I saw a post on Crucible Playbook, and it was just a comment. It wasn't even a full post. It was just a comment, someone remarking about stability and what they thought it might do. They didn't know, they'd never tested it, they just thought it might. And I thought, there is no way in hell it does that. And I tested it, and lo and behold, it did. And it was mind blown, and it completely changed the way I looked at stability in this game. So what stability does is it basically is the amount that your gun jumps when you fire a shot. All right, so people have this idea that stability isn't really important because they think that your gun will reset in between shots, especially for low rate of fire weapons like snipers and things like that. They think that your gun resets in between shots. It actually does not. If you hit a certain point in the jump, your gun will reset at a higher point than what it was resting at before. For snipers, this is especially noticeable. But it's the same for things like scout rifles and stuff like that too. So stability is actually affecting how much vertical jump the gun gets, or side to side, depending on another stat we'll talk about later, recoil direction. So stability's got side to side movement, up and down movement, and the more stability you have, the higher that stat, the less total movement there is. Okay? So we talked about the accuracy cone beforehand. Imagine the accuracy cone is pointing out the end of a barrel. So you're holding a gun and it's got a cone, like an ice cream cone sticking out of it, right? Stability is going to, you pull the trigger, you pull the trigger, you pull the trigger, the gun goes up in the air, goes up in the air, goes up in the air. And you draw a line between each point where the barrel rests, or each point where the barrel is when the next shot is fired, right? And if you trace that line up, that's basically stability. The more stability you have, the more compact that line will be. All right? But stability also affects aim assist. The more stability you have, the slower the degradation of the aim assist cone is. So that circular reticle that's outside of the crosshairs that shrinks when we fire, if you have more stability, that cone actually shrinks, or that circle actually shrinks slower, more slowly. And it actually resets more quickly. So that was something interesting. That was the comment that was on Crucible Playbook that I did not think there was any way that was true, and it does. So stability actually affects your aim assist. For a while, people on hand cannons thought rifled barrel and reinforced barrel were 6 of one, half dozen of another. They thought they were totally equal perks. In fact, some people preferred reinforced so they didn't hurt their reload speed. They didn't realize that choosing reinforced, which crushes your stability, was actually making it less likely that your follow-up shots were going to be as accurate. because your aim assist was degrading much, much faster than it was when you were using rifled. And that's why rifled became the tier 1 perk and reinforced dropped down a little bit beneath it. So I thought that was really, really interesting. So you can see how all 4 of those perks kind of work together. They kind of function together to make what we call the feel of the gun. All right? And I just want to clarify that some people think that persistence affects stability. It does not. Persistence affects that accuracy cone we talked about earlier. All right? So people think persistence has to do with the stability itself, how much vertically the gun jumps. It does not. It's narrowing the accuracy cone. What persistence does is as you continue to fire, the accuracy cone gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's basically a straight line, and all the bullets are going in a straight line. So a gun can have high stability and a low accuracy and be a very inaccurate gun, because even though the gun doesn't jump much, the bullets spread out in that cone all over the place. Then a gun could have high accuracy and low stability and also be inaccurate, because even though the bullet goes dead center out of the barrel every single time, the stability is so bad that the bullets are spread up way vertically. So the best combination you can have is high stability and high accuracy. That means there's not a lot of upward movement or side-to-side movement, and the bullets don't spread out very much from the end of the gun. So hopefully that makes sense too. That's one I've had trouble trying to explain to people without like drawing them a picture. But I tried to do it. Hopefully I drew a picture in your mind for you.
Yeah, no, I definitely got the picture on this one. I mean, this is one that I really knew about from I guess last year when we kind of first talked about it. But nonetheless, it's always good to kind of get a refresher on how those things work together. And I hope that you guys listening along are able to take something away from that discussion as well, particularly the persistence perk, how that works. That's something that I guess I always assumed that it had to do with accuracy, since that's what it said, but it seems like it throws a lot of people off because of the way that it does work. It can feel like it's, in some way affecting your stability, but it, like you said, it's not. It's just making the bullets go in a straight line. So, but then understanding the importance of stability in a new way, I think that's something that was really kind of a shock to the PvP world in a lot of ways, in terms of how important stability is for hand cannons, because hand cannons are kind of the premier tier 1 weapon and have been for probably the majority of Destiny's life cycle. But for such a long time, nobody really knew that stability mattered in any meaningful way. And I still think, depending on the gun, it can be a bit of a toss-up whether you want reinforced barrel or rifled barrel. My personal preference is going to vary from gun to gun depending on what the base stability is. And I suppose it also depends on what your use case is. Are you going to be spamming a ton of bullets, or are you just trying to 3-tap and move on? You may need more stability if you're going to be dropping more consecutive shots out of the gun. So there's some room for debate there, but it did make stability part of that discussion, whereas beforehand, nobody really cared. You tank your stability, no big deal. So really beforehand, reinforced was the premier choice because nobody knew that they were hurting themselves in any way by taking that. It was just like, oh, stability, it's a hand cannon, who cares? So that really brought a whole new facet of that discussion out, which is great. We're all better players for it, so I like that. And yeah, I guess that's all there is to say about stability.
And tying into stability is, I believe, the first stat that you're going to take the lead on, which would be recoil direction.
Yes. So recoil direction is an interesting stat. Interesting, I guess, in that there is a stat for it, right? It's one of those things that when you first look at one of the databases and you see recoil direction, and it's this number between 1 and 100, and you're like, so is that like on a clock face, or what does that mean? And basically, it's really confusing how they reach that number is not something I've ever figured out. But the higher that number is, the closer to 100, the more vertical your recoil will be. So 90 to 100 is essentially vertical. You essentially can't tell the difference at that point, whether it's vertical or just very close to vertical. But it's going to be straight up and down. Whereas a recoil direction of 50 or 60 or even lower is going to be much more horizontal, side to side, left to right. Typically, recoil direction is going to favor one direction over another, although it can jump around. Particularly in the case of auto rifles, it can very much jump around randomly. However, you'll still see if you're shooting at a wall for an extended period of time that it's going to kind of favor like up and to the left, up and to the right. And there's not a way that we're aware of to determine if it's going to go left or right. The recoil direction stat does not appear to indicate that. So if there is a means of figuring that out based on the numbers, we don't have it at this time. It's kind of an open question, not one that we have been too concerned about, because mostly you just need to know, is it going to be vertical, is it going to be horizontal, how horizontal is it going to be? And so from what I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, Merc, here, but from what I've seen, 50 is pretty horizontal. It's still going to be a little bit up one way or the other, but it's going to be definitely favoring that left or that right side very strongly. Whereas, of course, like I said, 90 to 100, you essentially can't, if it's not straight vertical, you can't really tell the difference without doing freeze frames and measuring.
I find 70 for... So there's some weapons it doesn't matter on. Scout rifles, recoil direction doesn't really have that much of an effect. Pulse rifles, auto rifles, I find it has a lot of an effect. Hand cannons are one of the guns that some people actually prefer low recoil direction. For instance, IS Luna has a very low recoil direction. I believe it's like 60. And people like it because they feel like it gets the gun out of the way of the target and lets them realign. I personally don't. I like my gun to go vertically because I feel like good players can strafe against the recoil direction when they know what weapon you're using, and it actually makes it harder to track the target. I'd prefer my gun to just go up and down so I don't have that issue, but that's a story for another day. 70 is about the recoil direction where I say on an auto rifle or a pulse rifle, you don't really need counterbalance anymore. So what counterbalance does is it basically bumps the recoil direction up, not to completely vertical, but let's say to about like 80% of vertical or something like that. So it's pretty darn close to vertical once you get counterbalance. Unfortunately, it takes that sideways movement and it actually adds it to the vertical recoil. So your bullets are actually spaced out more in the vertical direction when you use counterbalance. However, because it's going basically straight up and down, you can force down on that stick and actually get yourself a tighter spread. Recoil direction is extremely important for this reason on fusion rifles. You want that high vertical recoil direction so you can flick the stick downwards and get a really tight grouping, which is much easier than having to move the stick in a circle if you've got a horizontal spread.
Speaking of fusion rifles, I do feel like we should just very quickly say fusion rifles are one of those weapons that works differently than other guns. Range, which we've already kind of talked about to death, and I don't want to get back into entirely, on fusion rifles, range does not really so much control the damage drop-off. I mean, it does, but the damage drop-off is so far out that it's not really worth worrying about too much. What it does do is it still controls, of course, your aim assist drop-off in a big way. But it also impacts bolt speed, how fast the bolts travel, because the bolts are actual like things being simulated in the game that take time to go from point A to point B. That said, the difference in bolt speed between high range and low range fusion rifles is fairly negligible within 40 meters, which I would consider your combat distance. If you're further away than 40 meters and you're landing shots, you're pretty good with the fusion rifle, and good for you. That's awesome. I think that's great. For most people, you're probably trying to get a little closer than that to land your bolts, and your bolt speed then probably is not that important.
Yeah, and people are going to say, well, range is the most important stat when you're good at fusion rifles. Well, it is, but the bolt speed is actually less important than something I discovered recently testing fusion rifles. They suffer from bloom the same way that hand cannons do. The difference is it's mid-shot because they fire one bolt a frame for 7 frames. The reticle, the accuracy cone, starts small and balloons outward as the bolts go. So by the time you're on your 4th or 5th bolt, that accuracy cone is quite a bit wider than it was when you started. And something that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, range actually decreases the size of that cone that those bolts can bloom out to. So higher range means a tighter grouping, even if you don't manually control them at all. It means a tighter actual grouping. Keep in mind, this doesn't have to do with stability. If you have bad stability, your vertical movement of the barrel is still going to mean the bolts are going to spread out really far, but they're going to be grouped more centrally around, the center point of the barrel is what we'll call it. So that's part of the reason why high skill players still like range on their fusion rifles. What I always do is I recommend stability for players who are learning because it makes it easier to control the bolt spread. And then I recommend range. Once you've got it down manually and you don't need them anymore, I start to recommend range.
Yep, and that's really all I wanted to say about fusion rifles. If you want to get the full scoop on fusion rifles and how they work in the game, I highly recommend that you go back and listen to our episode on fusion rifles with Buster Knuckle from RNG Cast. It was a great episode. We covered all of this in a lot more detail there than we're going to get into here because we want to stay away from breaking down individual weapon classes and try to stick to the stats today. But yeah, that's a concise way of kind of explaining the difference with how fusion rifles work in this particular case. So that's recoil direction in a nutshell. There's not a whole lot more to say except that in most cases, for most weapons, vertical recoil is easier to control. That's why counterbalance is such a popular perk on so many guns, even guns that you and I, Merc, might not feel that it's necessary on. It's what we might call a crutch perk. That's maybe another discussion for yet another day. I'm sure I'm sure we could get ourselves a lot of salt by going over all of the perks that we think are crutches and all of the perks that we think are actually good.
It's pulse rifles. I don't think counterbalance is necessary on pulse rifles a lot of the time.
Yep.
Other people do. I don't.
There you go.
But yeah, that's an argument we can get into another time because some people vehemently disagree with that assertion. So
yeah,
not here, neither here nor there.
Yes. So moving on from recoil direction, I actually want to answer a question from Twitter and talk about some of the other stats that I was going to talk about anyway. So very fortunately, we got a question from somebody who follows us, and let me go ahead and pull that up here. So Miguel asked, he wrote, interested in inventory size and its relation to ammo capacity over here. Also, I'm guessing optics is related to zoom factor? And he has a nice community GIF for us there, which I appreciate. So let's talk about inventory first, because inventory, I guess, I would say is kind of the ultimate example of what people mean when they talk about fruit space in Destiny stats. If you've ever heard somebody say, well, there's a lot of fruit space, so it's kind of hard to say exactly what this means, inventory is like the prime example of that. Essentially, what inventory is a numerical stat that has some abstract relation. It causes abject frustration in me, but it has an abstract relation to the amount of ammo that a given weapon can hold in reserve, and also to the amount of ammo that you get when you pick up an ammo brick. So the higher your inventory size is, the more ammo you can hold in reserve, and the more ammo you get when you pick up a brick. So high inventory size, say on a rocket launcher in PvP, means you'll get more rockets per purple brick, which is good. And likewise with special ammo, if you have a sniper rifle with very high inventory size, you're going to get more bullets per green brick, right? So that's a good thing. High inventory is very good, and if you have two weapons that are otherwise the same, but one has a better inventory than the other, that's probably worth having in many cases. That said, for the majority of weapons, I don't think that exactly the inventory numbers you need to attain specific reserve ammo sizes and bullets per brick have been calculated out. The only ones off the top of my head that I am aware of are sniper rifles, which are current, up to date. Merc, you did the hard work on those. I know some other people have also done those numbers as well, so there's a lot of good data out there on how many bullets you'll get per brick for sniper rifles, depending on your inventory score. And you also did rockets, but it appears that the rocket inventory calculations may have changed. So those numbers may be a little
We'll
off.
just say may have changed.
Yeah, not confirmed.
Because I don't know for sure. I haven't gone back and tested them, but I got a tip from someone who was reading over them that he said it appeared that they were different in PvE. They still hold true in PvP, mind you. So that's still good to go. But that means the numbers on the spreadsheet that I have for what it takes to get 3 rockets per brick, those are all still good. But the PvE inventory numbers appear to have become slightly different.
There you go. There you go for that. Bungie always giving us more work to do, which we appreciate. So that's inventory size. That's how it works. One of those things. Just more is better. Like I said, we don't have numbers for you for every weapon archetype because that would take a lot of time, and certainly primaries aren't even worth that time. Machine guns. I mean, you're just going to have more bullets, right? So there's not a whole lot of value that you can really be gained there. Shotguns might be the other one that could be worth looking into, and there may be some numbers out there on that. I don't recall them, but I wouldn't be surprised if we have calculations on that, and sidearms as well, of course, could benefit. Voopers, I mean, I don't think there's enough demand for that, but prove me wrong, right? Go out there, come out in force, and maybe we'll put those numbers together. So the other question I want to keep pushing forward here, Merc, unless you had something to add about inventory.
Nope. I think you pretty much got it.
Okay, so optics. The optics stat is another stat that you have to go to a database to see. So you got to go check out our friends at DestinyTracker.com. They've got all these stats for you right there. Zorth does the hard work to get those made available for you. Obviously, you can choose your DB of choice. Planet Destiny has a database. They're all over the place. Guardian GG. Take your pick. They've all got this stat. So optics is your zoom factor. Literally, like just put a decimal point in between the first number and the last number, and that's the zoom factor on the weapon. For exotic weapons and weapons that have fixed scopes or sights or scopes that don't affect the zoom factor when you're aiming down sights, that number can vary, right? So that's where the confusion perhaps sets in on exactly which scope does it apply to, or which sight does it apply to. Well, you can actually figure out what the zoom factor is for a given scope in the game very, very easily. All you need is something to record a couple of numbers with and a calculator, or if you're good at math, not even that. All you have to do is just go to patrol and find the farthest distance that you can see the numbers next to a patrol beacon from when you're aiming down sights with whatever weapon and scope you want to check. Divide that number by 15, and that will give you the exact zoom factor of that scope in the game. And of course, have to give full credit because I did not figure that out. That is all you, Mercules, for figuring that. As far as I know, you're the first person that I ever saw submit that. I think you put a post up on it a year ago about that, and it is super easy to do. If you want to double check a site number, if you have a site that you can't find a value for, or you don't feel like looking the value for up on the internet, then you can just go to patrol real quick and double check it yourself. So very easy to do, and that is how optics works. So pretty straightforward. The one thing, and I guess I'll pause for a second, Merc, in case you want to add anything on that, but I want to talk about what zoom factor does for weapons.
No, the only thing I gotta say is keep in mind that different weapons have different base zoom levels. So if you're equipping a sight that does not change zoom, a scout rifle is going to have a higher base zoom than, say, an auto rifle or than a hand cannon. And also, something kind of interesting, fusion rifle scopes, none of the scopes change zoom. Because zoom actually affects how much the weapon goes up and down. I think, was that what you were going to talk about next?
That's what I'm going to break into, yeah.
Okay, so I'm not gonna, so basically, if you had a really high zoom scope on a fusion rifle, you get a super tight bolt spread. So they nullified that, and every single fusion rifle now has 1.5 times zoom, except for Murmur, which when you switch to the high impact version somehow goes to 1.7 times, which means it basically gets a free rangefinder.
Nice.
So I just thought that was interesting for y'all.
Rangefinder plays into this a little bit. That's, I guess, a perk worth mentioning here, because Rangefinder applies a 0.1x zoom bonus to whatever gun it's on when you're aiming down sights, except for shotguns, which get a 0.05x zoom bonus, and also a aim down sights penalty, now that that's been fixed. So there's that, right? But here's what zoom factor is doing for your weapon. So Bungie they just have, I guess, a major hard on for that good feeling. They want every weapon to feel good all the time. They don't succeed all the time, right? But they're trying. That's their focus, and that's really, I think, one of the things that sells Destiny to people. It's hard to put the game down because it feels good. So zoom factor is part of that secret sauce, that Bungie KFC, if you will. What's happening when you aim down sights? Okay, right? You're zooming in, right? So think about that just for a minute. If you're hip firing with, say, a sniper rifle, the gun kicks up pretty hard, right? Now you can try to control that a little bit, but it's going to kick pretty hard. Imagine if you zoomed in 5 times and the gun kicked up that same amount while you were zoomed in. You wouldn't even have a clue what you were freaking looking at that point, right? Your reticle would just be like on the other side of the room after every shot. But that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen because Bungie modifies the recoil, like the actual amount of recoil that you experience in-game, by the zoom factor. So the higher zoom that a gun has when you're aiming down sights, the less recoil you experience when you're aiming down sights. Sniper rifles are one place where this is, I guess, really apparent. Like if you just go into the game right now or tonight or whenever, hip fire a sniper rifle, kind of pay attention to how much it jumps. It does not jump that much when you aim down sights. It doesn't. It jumps a much smaller amount, a much more manageable amount. It's the same apparent amount, which is why it's not jarring, right? You don't notice it. It's the same. They've maintained the apparent visual recoil by reducing the actual recoil of the gun, which maybe is a little confusing when I say it that way. Does that make sense to you, Merc?
Yeah, I mean, it looks the same because you're zoomed in more, but it actually is less.
Right.
It looks the same because you're zoomed in more, but it's less. It's like when you're looking through binoculars, if you were to move your head an inch up when you're not looking through binoculars, your view doesn't change that much.
Yes.
If you're looking through binoculars and you move your head an inch up, your view changes a lot.
Yep. So if recoil was not affected by zoom factor, then when you zoom in, say, 5 times on a sniper rifle, you should experience 5 times as much bounce every time you pull the trigger, which in real life, of course, you would. But because Destiny is not real life, it's a game that they want to feel consistent and good, you don't. So that's one of the things that zoom factor is doing for you. It is also applying a multiplicative benefit to the point at which your damage drop-off and aim assist drop-off start. And again, correct me if I'm not getting anything exactly right here, but essentially it pushes out the distance at which you can do max damage and that you benefit from your aim assist the most.
Yep.
So when you see, for example, damage drop-off numbers put out there, unless I'm greatly mistaken, those are always going to be with aiming down sights, because the assumption in Destiny, of course, is that you're aiming down sights most of the time. So if you go and you start trying to hip fire at those ranges, it's not probably going to work out very well. If you manage to land the shot, it may not do the damage that you expect. And that is zoom factor in a nutshell. Tried to knock that one out of the park pretty quick there, so hopefully that all makes sense. Let's see, what else do I have here? Since we talked about inventory real quick, I'll just say that magazine size is the number of bullets that you have in your gun's magazine.
And that the database is wrong a lot of the time.
Yes. Oh.
So the only real way you can check is by looking at the physical gun in the game when you have it equipped.
Not just the database, like Bungie's own armory, which it draws from the database, so I guess it makes sense, right? But it is flat out wrong. Like auto rifles in particular are egregiously inaccurate.
Yep, it is. It makes my job so hard. And a lot of hand cannons are wrong too.
Yeah.
There were a lot of hand cannons that says they have 12 shots in the mag that only have 10. That shit is so annoying. There's so many values wrong, and I guess it's because they manually enter them in the database. But like Bungie, don't even pay me. I will do that shit for free. I will go through and fix every single error in your database for free. I will do it all in a day. It cannot possibly be that hard, but it makes my life so much harder to know that, it says that the Genesis chain has 97 shots in the magazine. I don't think that's real. Then I have to go check it in the game every single time.
Yeah,
it's just annoying. But
it's one of those things you have to watch out for. Don't rely on a mag size number that you don't know has been verified in game. Which I know, Merc, is why you try to verify all of those in game. Obviously, there are still mistakes that are made. So if you see something wrong, say something, right? Shoot us a screenshot. Say, hey, this is the actual magazine size. These are the perks that I'm using to get that magazine size. And, it'll get fixed. So,
yep.
So there's that. Let's see. Do I have anything? Oh, of course. I have two stats left here. So reload speed, of course, is just your, how fast you reload your gun. Again, one of the most straightforward stats in the game. But also a stat that is very important to the feel of a gun, and that we often, I think, overlook, perhaps. Because it's one of those secondary stats, it's a stat that can be modified by perks, it's a stat that can be modified by armor perks, most notably, which is often what I rely on to get my reload speed back up, because I tend to tank that stat. Don't really have anything else to say about that.
Just got to make sure that you know that a higher reload stat is good.
Yes.
It is not an actual measurement of time.
Right.
So when you see it, it's not milliseconds or something like that. It's not a measurement of time. It's on a scale of 1 to 100, just like all the other stats, with 100 being the fastest, 1 being the slowest. Because I have had some people who are new to the game ask me about that.
And the scale that reload speed is measured on, that 1 to 100 scale, is unique for each weapon type. So the reload speeds for hand cannons can only be compared against the reload speeds of other hand cannons reliably. There may be some comparison to the reload speeds of other weapon types, but you can't really rely on that number to work exactly the same from weapon type to weapon type. An auto rifle and a hand cannon with the same reload speed may not reload at the same speed, and you shouldn't expect them to. That's true actually of all of these stats. All of these stats are on a scale that is unique to that weapon type, except for, of course, magazine size.
And rate of fire is shared between machine guns and
rate of fire.
Auto rifles.
Yep.
But for the most part, it's just easiest to compare between guns in the same weapon class. If you start comparing between, you should just know that scout rifles have the most range. You don't need to compare the range stat of a scout rifle with the range stat of an auto rifle.
Yeah.
Scout rifles have more range. That's just the way it works.
Yep.
Just compare within the same weapon class. It keeps everything nice and simple.
Yep, absolutely. It never fails that you make a general blanket statement and immediately have to qualify it. But there you go. Just compare within the weapon class. That's the easiest way to do it. So the final stat that I want to talk about has a ton to do with how good a weapon feels in the game, and that is equip speed. So equip speed, as you might guess, does affect directly how fast you can equip a weapon in Destiny. It also notably affects how fast you can stow that weapon, because stowing a weapon does take time in the game. And so even if, say, you are swapping to a weapon that has a very fast equip speed, if you're putting away a weapon that has a very slow equip speed, it's still going to take some time. Equip speed also affects your aim down sights time, because that, although it's very fast, does take an amount of time that is detectable by you and I. You may also see equip speed referred to on various perks and stats, especially a lot of sites affect this as handling. So handling also affects your stow speed, your equip speed, and your aim down sights time. You'll see that affected to a certain extent by perks like quick draw, which says that it affects, how fast you can get the weapon out, but also affects how fast you put it away and even how fast you aim down sights. And that's something that's been measured numerous times by a lot of great guardians who do good work. And it's not the only perk that does that. Injection mold, snapshot, these are all perks that affect handling one way or another. So that's equip speed or handling or stow or aim down sights time. It's all rolled up into one. Equip speed is the stat that we see in the game.
And you can tell the stow speed of your gun and the draw speed of your gun by, there's actually a brief time when you're switching weapons where there's no weapon on your screen, and that's where the two stop. So when you're putting away a gun, when that weapon disappears, that's the stow speed. So you can have a really slow stow speed, and then you switch to a weapon that has a really high equip speed, and it like whips back out basically, which I actually just hit my own microphone. Hopefully you guys didn't hear that, but it like whips back out. So you'll notice it when you use machine guns basically. If you have a really high equip speed, like a pulse rifle or something, and you put it away, it disappears really fast, but then the machine gun takes a long time to get drawn.
Yep.
You put the machine gun away, the machine gun takes a long time to go away, and then the pulse rifle's back out immediately. So equip speed is a very, very important stat on sniper rifles, on shotguns, on weapons that you're switching to quickly from your primary. On primaries, I feel like it's slightly less important. Hand cannons, it's pretty important on because they tend to be very, very slow.
Yeah.
And also because hand cannons are used for blinting, which is where you body shot someone with either a sniper or a shotgun, and then it's faster to switch to your primary weapon if you have a good equip speed and finish them off. You're not going to see people blinting with guns that don't do a lot of damage with single shots. So pulse rifles, you don't see it too often. Auto rifles, you don't see it almost at all. It's mostly hand cannons in general because they have the ability to, if you land a body shot with a sniper and then land a body shot with a hand cannon, get a kill,
yep.
Which is why people were using that a lot. So equip speed was pretty important for those. I don't find equip speed to be tremendously useful on other weapons simply because there's a number of sights that affect equip speed. So you can basically pick and choose if you want it to be fast or not depending on the sight. There's a number of perks that affect equip speed. And also just because with primary weapons, so often I'm not entering ADS at the beginning of an engagement. I'm, particularly with scout rifles and things, already ADS prior to the engagement starting, or I'm already pre-firing before even going ADS a little bit, which is what I noticed. I was involved in a debate the other day with someone who felt very, very strongly that equip speed was the most important stat on a primary weapon. Because he was saying that if you and another person are standing there, like in a duel, and you both go ADS at the same speed, or the same time, the person who has a faster ADS speed will start firing first, and thus will flinch the other person first. And it's like, well, yes, that's true. But the chances of you ever standing face-to-face with someone, neither of you ADS, both of you go ADS at the exact same frame, and then, the chances of a battle like that are very thin. So I started going back and watching some of my gameplay to see how often I was actually ADSing at the immediate start of a battle, and it wasn't really that often. I was very much pre-ADS going into a battle. I was not very often being surprised and having to quickly scope in, although there were a few times. But what I actually noticed when I was looking at the frame by frames is I start firing before your crosshairs shrink, basically, right? And they go down to a size, and your ADS animation takes a little bit longer than that. And I guess just from playing the game, I've started firing before I'm even fully ADS. I know when my gun becomes accurate when I'm scoping in. And so, especially with primaries, hand cannons in particular, and scout rifles, I'm firing before I'm even all the way ADS. So just want to throw that out there. Some people, equip speed might be really important for them. I feel like hand cannons, shotguns, sniper rifles, it is important. Everything else, probably not so much.
Yeah, I mean, guns like, say, sidearms, for example, are just going to pretty much have a good equip speed, so you don't really have to worry about it too much on them. The only other one that I would say that it can be worth looking at is if you are trying to use a fusion rifle, you need to be playing in a manner that is anticipatory to be successful there. You have to be prepared, and so you don't want to have the wrong weapon out at the wrong time. Sometimes that may mean that you have to swap weapons quickly. Having a very bad equip speed there can hurt you. Obviously, that's going to be a limited use case unless you're really into fusion rifles, in which case I suppose it probably comes up a lot. But that is the only other thing I would say, and I think that wraps it up for me. That is all of the stats that I had that I wanted to talk about. A couple other quick ones, of course. I suppose we could mention that rockets have blast radius and velocity. Those ones are pretty straightforward, as you might guess. It's the it's the velocity of the rocket and the blast radius of the rocket. So,
and the blast radius does not affect how much damage the rocket does. They all do the same amount of damage at the center of the blast radius.
Yep.
It's how far out that damage reaches, which is the blast radius. And one more stat I want to talk about, which we vaguely mentioned, is hit scan. Just for those of you who don't know what that is, hit scan means that the bullets have no travel time. They function similarly to a laser. So if I say something is hit scan, it means that when you pull the trigger, within that frame is when the bullet impacts the target. It basically reads where you're pointed and then marks it as hit. Hit scan.
Yep.
If it is non-hit scan, like Vestian Dynasty, like Queen's Choice, like rocket launchers, like fusion rifles, it means that there is actual physical travel time to the gun. So it means that it takes time for the projectile to leave the barrel and then hit the target, which means the target has time to move out of the way. Or it means you have to lead the target. Stuff like that. So that's the difference between hit scan and non-hit scan. Just want to say that because that's something that I put as a pro and con for sidearms, and it's something that you do have to keep in mind if you're playing with a gun like that. Because some people don't know why they're terrible with Vestian Dynasty. It's because, well, you're not leading your target, and you have to, because those projectiles are actually surprisingly slow.
They really are. It's one of those guns that it feels so good to shoot, but it feels so bad to watch yourself miss a ton. And it's very, I feel like it's a very difficult gun to learn because it just works differently from the other guns. And I don't want to get off onto a Vestian Dynasty tangent, but yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point for folks to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I guess that's it. That's it for me. I'm done.
Yeah. So I think that brings us to the end of yet another Massive Breakdown podcast. Thank you, as always, Guardians, for tuning in to episode 40 of the Destiny Massive Breakdowns podcast. And just as a closing note, I guess there's a few closing notes here. Do want to point you guys toward the Destiny Tracker podcast network. If you've run out of things to listen to, then you need to be checking out Destiny Lorecast, Rabbit Hole Radio, RNG Cast, and Destiny Down Under. These are all great people, very entertaining to listen to, and going to give you a very different experience from what you get right here. So it's good to have that variety in your life. A couple other points of note. There was a very cool announcement that just came out from Destiny Item Manager and Destiny Tracker regarding weapon reviews that we hopefully are going to be able to talk about more in the future, but it's public, so we can mention it now.
We are officially part of the team with Goose from DIM and Zorth from Destiny Tracker. We will be providing review services for that actual, I don't even know what to call it. I guess it is a service. It's a service of an app. But we're actually going to have, hopefully, Goose on here at some point in the future to get a little bit more in-depth with us about how it's going to work and what you can expect from it. So look forward to that. And speaking of Destiny Tracker,
yes,
I should have a video coming out for them shortly discussing comparisons between sidearm effective range and hand cannon effective range. I don't want to spoil it for you, but a fairly well-known person in the Destiny community yesterday was posting a tweet talking about they thought that the Wormwood actually outranged a God-rolled Eyes Luna, and so I decided to take that into private matches and test it out and see whether it's actually the case. And I guess I will spoil it for you. It is not. It is not the case.
Yeah.
I mean, technically, I guess you could say that it is, but if you want to figure out, I'm going to clickbait you here. If you want to figure out the secret to outranging sidearms with a hand cannon,
the details are worth digging into. Yeah, they're worth watching the video for. Obviously, the breakdown I think is already out there on Reddit, but if you're not really into reading, or you just don't have time to go sit there and look at a wall of text, by all means, watch for that video from Merck. That was kind of an interesting situation, right? Because I assumed that this was simply hyperbole, and I just pointed out that a lot of people probably would take it as literal fact because it's coming from a respected source. And I was told that it is in fact a literal fact and that I should test it out, and so I said I will. And I did test it myself on an interceptor, and I found the same thing that you found, and I commented to that effect. And I think some other figures jumped into the bandwagon. The whole discussion is out there for people who are really interested in digging into the nitty gritty. The takeaway is that anybody can fall prey to false impressions here, right? And that's why we do this whole massive breakdown thing, because anybody can hear a rumor or get an impression from play, or just get salty about something and maybe say something or come away with a belief that feels right but maybe isn't.
Yep, and I've had that happen to me before, as anyone who's followed along has known. It happens to the best of us, but that's why we got to test things and make them work. And so everything we've given you today has been stuff that we've tested on our own, and that's how we came up with that. There's actually been written articles that have posted, and I'll try to post a summary of my stats. I'm sure Kutch will post a summary of his, and we'll get those out in the next couple of days. But in the meantime, I think we're coming up on an hour and a half, so I'm going to go ahead and sign it off. Yeah. Thank you guys for tuning in. Really appreciate you stopping by. Hopefully you'll see us next week, and we'll have some cool announcements for you. So later.
Yep. Peace out, Guardians.